Fantastic. Well, welcome to our International Book Club. Today we have a truly sensational guest, and I thank you for joining
Thank you.
us from all over the world. We are going to review today Anomaly by the incredible Hervé Le Tellier. We have him here on screen, and Hervé is a French writer and linguist, a member of the international literary group LIPO. He's a man of quite incredible talents. He works as a writer, an editor, a journalist, has a background in mathematics, and has written many novels and short stories, dramas, and poetry, and has achieved international acclaim. And in November 2020, he received the prestigious Prix Goncourt for his novel, The Anomaly, which has sold over 1 million copies and is translated, he tells me today, in 45 languages. I think right now he's considered one of the most prestigious writers on the French scene, all over the metro and all over your screen. So let us get into the questions. So Hervé, thank you for being with us. Anomaly here is one of the very few books that my husband, who is a pilot, mathematician, and engineer, and me, a business technologist, a medieval historian, actually both loved. And I wondered, in this sort of combination of genres, in this data world, this dystopian future, why do you think that this book appeals to such an enormous set of individuals, categories, groups, etc.? What's its appeal, do you think?
Well, the first answer would be I have no idea. And at the second thought, I must have an answer. And I think one of the reasons of the success of the book has to be with the fact that it's a planetary book. It's a book where things are happening all over the planet. There's many characters. At first, my editor said too many characters, but I decided not to push any of them away. And it's also a book which is transgenerational, which means that it can be read by someone who is 17 and read by someone who is 80. On second thought, also, I built the book to be read from the beginning to the end without losing any reader. And I made most of possible things to keep my reader all along, which means I altered genders. I tried to have as many different characters as I could. I tried to have a story which would be an appealing story. And at the end, the fictional idea of the world was something which was very intriguing. And that could also be some kind of questioning for many readers, but would keep them from the beginning of the book to the end. The most difficult thing was to keep them through the first part with all these characters which were explained one after the other, and trying not to lose my reader, even if there was so many characters to expose and to describe. For 100 pages, you don't know what's happening. And for 100 pages, you wait until something really happens. And to keep the reader for 100 pages with nearly 10 chapters, which all of them expose one character, is difficult.
So that's but you managed it, because 1 million of us and more, got through that period and kind of delighted in the whole book. Now, the research is incredibly rich. And as you say, you created these incredible characters. Did you do all the research yourself? How did you sort of mix this sort of fiction with the reality of the individuals, which is very special?
Well, there's two things in your question. The first thing is, when a character is an architect, he has to be an architect, which means that I have to interview architects, so that even in one paragraph, there is no doubt that he's an architect because he knows names that the reader wouldn't. And he knows things about concrete that I didn't know at the beginning of the book.
Yes.
If you take a pilot, the pilot has to know everything about this line from Paris to New York. And I did interview pilots. And there's no mistake in this area of how you go through the Atlantic and so on. All the characters are corresponding to a certain amount of interviews, so that there wouldn't be any mistake. So this is the first point, which is building the characters. And the other one is also around the language. The language has to be adequate to each character. And there has to be a slight change of level of language so that each character is in a bath of language which corresponds to him. So it's easier for me to do this, even if I was an Olympian who would do this. Any writer who is confronted to such an amount of characters has to adapt them to their own language. Even if there is a fluidity, you have to have this density of character. And I've had many difficulties with the number of pages allowed for one character, which is not more than 6 or 7 pages sometimes to define them. So the interviews, the language, the reality, everything was arranged all together to give the impression that they were real. And this is also a point that I was trying to work on, which was introducing inside the book things of our reality. Emmanuel Macron, our president in France, Xi Jinping, Ed Sheeran, Elton John. And this was the general idea of having a book full of pop culture.
Yes.
So that everybody would know where we are. It's now. It's happening now.
Yeah, it very much felt like a book of our time. And but who inspired? I mean, the array of characters. Let's take the, extraordinary Blake as an example. There must have been inspirations for these characters over the course of some years, or did they just come to you as you began to write and build?
I built the characters on a very different way that I build characters usually. Usually in a book, you have one character and you throw him in a certain amount of situations. In this case, in the Anomaly, it's the opposite way around. I had one situation, which is the confrontation to yourself. And we'll speak about that. And when you're confronted to yourself, there's many possible reactions. And it goes from killing yourself to sacrifice yourself, with many, many other situations in between. Sacrifice and killing. And to kill, I wouldn't kill myself. If I was confronted to myself, I would negotiate. I would in no way kill the other one. I hate blood. I'm not ready to that. So I had to build a character who would be able to do it. And this is how Blake came out. Blake came out with the idea that one of my characters has, in this confrontation, to take the decision of killing the other one. And no other person than a killer can do that. So he had to be a killer. And after that, I didn't want to make a special killer. He had to be a stereotype killer. It didn't matter. And I was going away from the stereotype with other things, like he's a cook, and he's a vegetarian cook. So this is the main idea, which is very strong because it drives you away from the typical killer, and he's funny this way. And he's a strong character because he has these two lives, as a cook, vegetarian cook, and as a professional killer. So all of them are built this way. They have two lives and they are in opposition. And it's the building of this contrast which allowed the characters to be stronger.
Yes. And many people that join in this book club, we're on the International Book Club interviewing the amazing Hervé Le Tellier, writer of the Anomaly. Many have said that their love of technology and data and science, that you have perhaps created a new category of book. I'm not a publisher, I'm not in the book world, but do you think that this type of book, this fusion of all of these elements, is something that you can or will or want to write more of? Or was this something of its time and moment?
I have no idea what I'm going to do next. As a matter of fact, it's the first book I wrote like this. I'm conscious that it's not the first book I could have written. I have had to write many books before to be able to write this one, because I was playing with styles, I was playing with genre, literary genre, which I had experimented before. And so I was using all my experience to make a new book very different from what I had done before. There are books about, of course, science fiction, and I was a very big fan of science fiction when I was young. So I think I wrote a book that I really wanted to read and to have read even when I was younger. It's not a type of book I have read, but it's very close to things of Kaidik. It's very close from things of Romain Gary sometimes, and it's also close from Chandler, which I love.
Yes.
So altogether, I mixed all this together inside a cocktail of book, and it's a kind of uncommon book, which made a surprise for me for the success, because it was kind of an experimental book, and at the same time a popular book.
Yes.
So the success of an experimental book is always surprising.
Yes,
but at the same time, I made everything possible to make it fluid and to make it possible for any reader, every layer of reader, to read it. Because you can read it as a thriller, you can read it as a science fiction book, or you can read it as a literary book that speaks about literature. And speaks about what is literature and what is a book and what is a character. And all these layers built a very special type of book that I didn't think I would ever write. But it's a good thing not to know which type of books you're going to write.
Indeed. And there are two themes of questions that are starting to come in. One is, the themes in the novel, are quite serious, and, there is a darkness to it too. Murder, death, suicide, as you've described. Yeah, the novel is, I think, very funny and quite light in a sense. And you could say that the French use humor very well to tackle some of the most tormenting issues. And so this question of humor, you and I don't know each other. I don't know if you're a very funny sort of man, but are you conscious of this pervasion of humor throughout the book?
Yes. Some parts are made to be funny, really funny. I'm thinking especially about the love story between Adrian and Meredith, which is supposed to be a literary adaptation of a kind of movie I love, which is the British romantic comedy, of Four Marriages and a Burial, and this type of thing, which has written Richard Curtis, of whom I'm a big fan, really. And this type of reading goes also with another type of writing goes also with another part of writing which is very dark. For example, the story of Marco, who is a pilot who's always dying. If you read this part alone, not reading the other parts, it's a very sad story all along, and there's no way to smile about it. But it's the contrast of funny parts and very dark parts which makes the book humoristic. If you want to have a book which is light, you have to go from it's like Hitchcock, I love Hitchcock. And in Hitchcock, you have these funny parts, really funny parts, even in the darkest areas of the film. And I think what makes a book light is the presence inside the book of more heavy parts, more dark. And the light is stronger when you get out of the dark. It's like
Yeah.
It's like in life when you
Yes.
drive
Totally.
and you go out of a tunnel,
Yeah.
the sun is so much brighter. So you have to
Yes.
have these dark areas inside the book, so that when you get out of it, it's bright and it's funny, and it's even more funnier, even funnier if you get out of something very sad. So
Yes.
the alternative was very interesting to work on, and the chapters were organized also to have this contrast, this alternative reading all the time. And I worked on it because I
Wow.
think what I like in books is this kind of things: being
Yes.
sad, being entertained, laughing, and being sad again.
Yes. For everyone who's joining us, we are proud to be interviewing Hervé Le Tellier, talking about Anomaly. And the second theme that's come up in the questions, Hervé, is, perhaps with so many techies on the line, the sort of matrix dystopian. Do you believe in this notion of our world as a digital simulation? Is that something that has struck you deeply in the build up to this book, or was it more the dislocation of COVID and the vortex of change that the world is going through, or something completely different?
When I wrote the book, uh, my first idea was writing about confronting to yourself and confronting to another self who has a very small difference with you, which is 3 months of difference of life. And these 3 months were very important. And after that, I didn't want to make a fairy tale, to write a fairy tale. So not writing a fairy tale brings you to the idea of finding a solution which is materialistic, which is mathematic. And I thought about a conference I saw 20 years ago of Nick Bostrom, um, about the general simulation of the world. The idea that the world isn't real, this is just a big simulation. And this idea is very strong. It's very interesting for two reasons. The first, as an experiment of thought, thinking, my sense is real. Is what I see real? Is what I hear real? It's the Berkeley experiment, if a tree falls in the forest and there's nobody to hear it, is it making any sound? And this is a very interesting idea. And the second idea was about the simulation, is that on the literary point of view, it's very close to novels. Novels are worlds where you inside which you go, and you don't ask yourself, is it real or is it not real? You accept everything. And you accept that the characters are real. You accept that you even have some kind of empathy with them, and sometimes they become your friends.
Yes.
And the fact that a character becomes a friend drives you to the idea that maybe your friends are characters in a general game. What's the difference? On a Stoician point of view, it's the same. And what is real is what you feel, and not what is real. So what's a feeling? What is being hurt? What is cutting yourself? What is dying? What is being born? Is it part of a program? Is it a real sensation? What is a sensation? Is it outside us, or is it just in the brain? And what is the brain if it is not a black box? And all these ideas all together makes the idea of a simulation very interesting. There's been an article very recently, I think it was in New Scientist, and in New Scientist, it was a scientific article, and the general conclusion is that we had 47% to be in a simulation. And the number of 47% was very reassuring. I was very happy, but it wasn't 51, it's just 4%. 47% and 51 is different. So I was very happy from this difference. It's possible that we are in a simulation. The idea of Nick Bostrom is very strong. It's very simple to expose. And if you think about it, it is very disturbing. It brings you some kind of vertigo, but it doesn't change anything. You fall in love, you are hurt, you die, and you are born. So what's the difference between a real life and a false life? being
Yes.
biological or being electric. I think it was a very, very powerful idea. So
Yes.
that's why I used it.
Yeah,
And
I think it's and
it's not a new idea.
in a vortex of change where you've got technology change, climate change, health change with the pandemic, and a big focus on better diversity, inclusion, equity. It seems a very popular theme. I mean, The Matrix is over a decade old now, but Black Mirror, etc. A number of people are asking on the chat, this simulated world, would you ever agree for this to be a TV series, a book? It seems to have captured so much energy and imagination at this time.
Yeah. Well, I saw the Black Mirrors. I thought it was a very extraordinary series.
Yeah.
And the book is the opposite of the Matrix, of course.
Yeah.
It's the exact opposite. But you have these kind of ideas in Black Mirror. I do not claim that the idea is new. Not at all.
No.
It's not a new idea. It's been in the world since Philip K. Dick, and it's 30, 50, 40 years old. But it's just 20 years old that the scientific world is interested in it. And it's an inversion of a paradigm of the law of Moore, which means that if we are able in 2 centuries to simulate a whole world, why isn't this already happening?
Yeah.
And why aren't we in the simulation that is going to be put on in 200 years? And the other idea is that we are more and more in simulations. We try to simulate what the world is going to be with the global change of the climate. We try to simulate how the pandemic is going to evolve. So everybody knows what a simulation is. Even when you try, for example, a medicine, you try to see how it's going to affect your body. And you try to test the medicine on a virtual body to see how it's going to work. And then you test it. So we are already for about 50 years in a world of simulation because the computers do it. Sure. And it's going to be more and more efficient, and it's going to be more and more powerful. So, yeah, this idea was very, very powerful.
Very powerful. And as we have so many compute folks on the call, they're delighted with the notion of the supercomputer creating simulation and Moore's law. But also you've benefited from Metcalfe's law, the network effect. The book keeps selling and selling and selling, which is fantastic. There are a couple of, not deeply personal, Hervé, but some questions about you that have come up. The first is, we have here in the UK with the BBC Radio 4 Desert Island Discs, and people are very intrigued considering what a diverse background you have, which I think is highlighted in the precision of your interviews, maths, pilots, religious, etc. People have asked, what is the book that you would take to your desert island? Has that changed since the writing of a rock star book, Anomaly, or has that been dear to your heart for a long time?
What book would I take? One of the questions is, what book would I take to in an island? Yeah.
Yeah, there's we have a show called Desert Island Discs, and you're allowed to take one book. They provide the Bible and a few other, terms of significance, but you're allowed to take one book. And people have asked, what might that book be?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. I think I would take a big book.
A big book.
So I think I would take Proust, La Recherche. First, because it's long, and you can take 1 year to read it and to reread it again. So that's one of the first reasons. I wouldn't take a very small book, that's for sure. And if I had a small book to take, I think I would take Kohelet, l'Ecclésiaste, which is a part of the Bible, and it's it's a book of book of Coelet, son of David, and
Yes. Yes.
many of the sentences we use now come from this book. Nothing under the sun. And if I was on an island, I think I would like to read a book where it's written nothing under the sun, nothing new under the sun.
That's beautiful. Thank you.
And really, I think it's one of the first world poetry
Yes,
in the civilization, in our civilization. It's a
it
very
is.
interesting book.
What a marvelous recommendation. We'll certainly, that's beautiful. And then the other sort of semi-personal, I mean, I'm British, so it's never going to be that personal. But do you have a fantasy about a second or a double life, something that having created, and there are lots of questions, by the way, about why 3 months, but there's too many data analysts on the call, I think. But why 3 months? Why, not 6, but do you have a fantasy about a second or a double life in light of what you've written?
I think all writers have a fantasy about having another life, because what we do is writing other lives. So when I write the life of a pilot, I am a pilot. When I write the story of Slimboy, who is black, homosexual, and Nigerian,
Yep.
I am for a moment black,
Yep.
homosexual, and Nigerian. So these are experiments of thought and of writing, which of course leads us to another place where we're not used to be. So I have this since I'm young. I write to have another life. That's obvious. I mean, and even I write to build another world in which I'm more free than in this one. And it's a world of books. I think all writers do that. I think it's Virginia Woolf who said something like this, and so did Dorothy Parker, and so did Faulkner. All writers have this idea of building lives to evade from theirs, because we don't live in an adventure. So some writers live in an adventure. I don't know, or seem to build an adventure. Hemingway, Romain Gary, this type of characters who really have a life which is an adventure. My life isn't. So I'm using other ways, and writing books, having characters which are different of me, is very useful to that. I've never been a 7 years old girl, and I will never be. So I'm allowed to be, and that's why we write fictions.
And like Charlotte Bronte said, I see me through my words, maybe. And there's some beautiful writers there that you've referenced. And we were talking about this just before we started broadcasting live, and a lot of people have been interested about the translation, because to be translated in 45 languages, with obviously French as your mother or father tongue, you were explaining how you did this sort of audio book that would allow all the translators to converge around ensuring that every language got what you had intended with your words. Tell us a bit about the translation process.
It's the first time this book, it's the first time one of my books has been so much translated, of course. 45 is really a lot. But I had books before that had been translated in 10 languages. And for these books already, I had arranged some kind of a digital book on which every writer, every translator, which is every writer, would take opinions and confront opinions about ways of translating. Usually there's 3 or 4 points which are difficult to translate. One of them is the tense. In French we have a few ways of talking about the past, which is imperfect, which is simple past, which is composed past. We have many ways of writing about the past. which is not the case in German, which is not the case in English.
No.
You have preterite, and that's all. And we have many ways. And the reason we have many ways is that there's different paths for us. And how to translate this is difficult. The other thing about translation is that sometimes you write in your own language without taking any attention of how it's going to be translated.
Yes.
And you discover it when the translator says, this is not possible, this isn't translatable. How are we going to translate it? And we find a solution. And usually it's for this kind of situation, for this kind of issue, the discussion between many translators is very useful.
Yes.
I have 3 very excellent translators that know each other, which are Adriana Hunter, who translated this book in English, Jürgen Ritter, who translated in German, and I have a friend who is a Greek translator, who's an extraordinary translator, who's Achilles Kyriakidis, who translated, I don't know, Borges, who translated Calvino, and he's a very good translator. And he always sees things in my books that I haven't seen. I mean, mistakes sometimes, and he shows them to me, and it's too late because the book is being translated. And if he read it before, I would have changed it in the first book.
Yeah.
So it's always interesting to be confronted by translators, because they are the best readers you can have.
Yes.
And they read it very slowly, and they see errors, they see approximations, and you have to sometimes change things. And the book, the Anomaly now in French, which is going to be published in pocketbooks in a few months, is different from the first version because of the translation. And I've changed some. It's cosmetic, but it's real. I changed some things because of the translators.
Wow.
It's important to have translators.
Yeah. That's really very rich for all of those with the different languages that we have. Joining in the importance of language, words, and the translation process. Now, questions come in, obviously someone who knows a great deal about these awards, that winning the Prix Goncourt is like a huge thing. How do you process that? How do you stay grounded? I mean, we've only known each other a very short period of time, and you were so humble and grounded and willing to talk to a very wide range of people. How do you do that?
Well, it happens to me as I'm old. So it's a big change. I mean, if I was 40, I would probably react in another way. My life is made. Most of my life is made. I have written 30 books before. So it comes as a certain point in my career, if I can call it a career, where it's not so important. I mean, everything has been done already, and I have probably 10 more or 15 more books to write. But it comes to a point where all the other books that I've written before are coming out again and being translated and being noticeable as they were already dead. And so it's a revival for some books. They resurrect, which is important.
Very Victor Mansell.
Yeah, it's very nice because things. I always was very free with my writing, so having the Goncourt is very important for me because it makes me very visible, but it doesn't change many things to my life. And this is very, it's. I received it very peacefully, which wouldn't be the case if I was younger. And it's a bit sad I didn't receive it before, but on a second opinion point of view, I'm very happy it happens now and not before, because I wouldn't probably have done the same things, and I'm very happy of what I did before, and I had no pressure, and I don't have any pressure now because there's no way I'm going to do better. There's no possibility. How can I do more than 1,200,000 books sold in France? It's impossible to do better. So I have no more pressure, and this is nice.
Well, and what a nice and refreshing, and I think for all of us over 40, sort of beautiful that you can experience these things with the humility and the grace and the peace, as you say. So it's been really great of you to give us a chunk of your time. I know you've got TV interviews, Arte and others later on today. There's just a final question, and then we'll let you get on with your life and work. I wonder if this has come from a French person. It says you have a very philosophical way of thinking and talking. Has this been this philosophical red thread through your work? Is this something that is being French, being you, being the writer you are, or is it just someone's strange question?
I don't know. I had an English youth. I've been for 5 years in England, when I was 5 and up to 10. And this has also changed and altered my way of thinking in French. Of course, I have forgotten a lot of English, which is also due to the fact that when I was 10, maybe I was fluent, and then I forgot, and even my accent isn't so good. If I would stay about 1 month in England, I think it would be back, and I would have some pleasure speaking English, and now it's a bit of an effort. So I'm a bit uncomfortable with words, even in French. Sometimes I wonder how the phrase is supposed to be organized, and I move I move a comma from one place to the other one. I'm not so sure the comma has to be there. And this is interesting, not to be so sure in your own mother tongue. It's interesting for a writer not to be at ease and not to think he's at ease. And I'm not at ease in French. It's a very interesting way of writing, not to be completely at ease in your language, because you question always the way it's written and the way you think. And this is, I think it's a chance for me to be between several languages and to doubt when I write. And I'm very happy to doubt. I'm very happy not to be sure of what I'm writing. And I think it's a weakness. At the same time, it's a strength, because the way you write is always movable and some modular, I would say.
Modular.
Yeah, modular.
Yes.
And the modularity of my writing is very obvious for me, and it's a help.
Well, I think that is great advice too. Certainly, the older I get, the less sure I am about most things. But I wanted to thank you again on behalf of everyone who's joined. Hervé Le Tellier, good luck. I mean, I think you're quite wrong in one sense. You will do more. The book will sell over 1 million copies in the rest of the world. And we wish you the greatest of good writing. Thank you very much, sir.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Merci encore.